Pardon the interruption. I am Sam Mulberry. I am your professor for CWC this summer, and I am joined by
Annie Berglund from Seoul, South Korea.
Yeah, so Annie, we are on different sides of the world, and that's one of the things that's kind of fun about teaching a summer online course is students can be anywhere, teachers can be anywhere. I'm going to be in Europe for the first part of the class. I'm obviously in Bethel right now. Is it like a 13-hour difference between your time and my time, something like that?
I think it's 14 hours. So if you look out my window, it's nighttime here, but clearly it's daytime for you.
Yeah, it's like 7 a.m. for me and much later for you.
Exactly.
All right, so at different ends of the day. So we are here on this webisode to kind of introduce you to the course. We'll be doing these throughout the summer, kind of at key points in the middle of units and at the end of units as we're preparing for exams. But Annie, first, maybe let's talk about what is CWC. This is a course that both you and I have taught, but can you give students a little introduction to what CWC is?
Yeah, so most universities will have like a survey Western civilization course that most freshmen will take, right? Like a required course. But this one is different because CWC has an extra C in it for Christianity, right? So it's a survey history of the West, but also looking at the story of Christianity embedded in that, and how Western values and belief systems have developed in accordance with Christianity and sometimes butting up against Christianity. So it's a unique story. And we start in ancient Greece, ancient Rome, and we look at the cultural values and the history of those specific contexts as they bring us to the birth of Christ. And then after Christ, we branch out and we see, what happens to Christianity? What is the story that brings Christianity from Jesus's birth to today? How did it grow? What things did it come up against where it was a problem, or what eras was it flourishing? How did we move from being a persecuted religion to one that coincides with empire and benefits from empire? So there's a lot of big questions surrounding it. We end the course bringing us through the Renaissance, the Reformation, into the scientific revolution, and into a more modern era. So it's also a class about how we move from the ancient world to modernity. So there's kind of three main objectives to the course. The first one I would say is this course is less about memorizing dates and historical facts. It's more about cultivating historical empathy. So it's about trying to put yourselves in the context of the people that you're learning in order to understand them, their values, their perspectives, and why they might act or believe a certain thing. The second objective is to challenge our ideas and perhaps reconsider our own perspectives. To say, like, if I call myself a Christian, what does that actually mean for me? And where did that come from? And which people from decades or centuries past who are Christians are influencing me today and in my walk with Christ? And then the third objective, and perhaps the biggest one, is to ask big questions. So we start out asking questions like, who am I? What do I believe in? Who am I in relationship to other people? So if my answer again is, I'm a Christian, well, what does that mean about what I believe? What does it mean about what I do? If my answer is, I'm American or I'm from the West, what does that mean? If my answer is, I'm a woman, how does that influence me, right? So it's about how we communicate with each other too in our context today. And it helps us to look at the past to be able to understand that as well. So I think that's kind of CWC in a little nutshell. Sam, why do we do CWC online?
It's a really good question because, traditionally this course is taught in a face-to-face format. This course has a long tradition at Bethel. It is I think 38 years old. We're almost to the 40th anniversary of CWC being part of the Bethel curriculum. You and I don't go back that far in the course, but we go back pretty far in the class. And traditionally, this course is taught in a lecture format where students would have 2 lectures a week, and and one small group a week over a normal 15-week semester. And it's always been team taught, so usually taught by 4 instructors coming from different disciplinary backgrounds. So that's how CWC is always taught. Now, when we move it to the summer, some things change. We get a much shorter time period. So this, course will take place over about 5.5, 6 weeks rather than, a 15, 16-week semester. And it's completely asynchronous online, which provides for some different things. One of the things is it provides you with some convenience and flexibility. I mean, over the summer, you're not probably taking a lot of other courses. You might be working a job or doing something else. So there's no, other than on exam days, there's no like specific time in the day where you have class. So it provides some flexibility that, we maybe don't have during a regular semester when we're in kind of a more regimented academic schedule. That being said, it still is a course where you're going to have work just about every day. So regardless of when you do your work, you should plan on probably around 2 to 3 hours a day of homework for the class. Now, one of the things that is really great about CWC, if it was just for convenience doing it online, there's some helpful things with that. But we actually get to do some things that we're not able to do in the regular face-to-face course. As I said, in the face-to-face course, there's maybe 4 instructors. Over the course of this summer, you're going to encounter 22 different Bethel professors from fields even beyond what normally gets taught in CWC. So yes, you're going to hear from historians and philosophers and theologians and political scientists, but you're also going to hear from English professors, and you're going to hear from scientists, and you're going to hear from anthropologists, and you're going to hear from just all people from all kinds of different backgrounds speaking into this course. And we're going to do that by kind of delivering content in 3 ways. So there's 3 different types of class days you'll have this summer. The first will be watching documentary films. So we have a series of 10 documentary films that we put together, and really their job is to kind of tell you the story of CWC. So Annie was talking kind of about this historical narrative that goes from the ancient world to the modern world in the West. Those documentary films will run alongside that and tell that story. And they're really based around interviews with these 22 different professors to help tell that story. Now, we'll have your homework on some days will be to watch those and do readings. On other days, we'll have our second way of delivering content, which is through these online museums that we've built, these interactive online museums. And they're really different than a normal class period, than a lecture or something like that, because when you think about sitting in a classroom listening to a lecture, that lecture is pretty linear, right? The lecture begins, it has a middle, and it has an end, and you're kind of walking through that lecture. The museums are really more like walking through an actual physical museum you've been to. There is not necessarily a right way to go through it. You're walking into different rooms, you're exploring, you're asking questions, you're sort of following the things that interest you. That's sort of how these virtual museums will work. They're a lot less linear, more about experience and exploring. And, there's going to be choice too. When you go into these museums, they may have 3 hours of audio content in them. That doesn't mean you need to listen to every second of audio in that museum. Partially, sometimes the assignments you're going to be doing are going to ask you to make some choices to say, pick one of these 3 rooms and take a look at the stuff that's in there and maybe write a little bit about that or something like that. So you're going to have some choice in those. So we have the documentary films, we have the museums, and then lastly, we have these webisodes. So 7 times throughout the summer, Annie and I will be here for these webisodes. And this is really to replace small group a little bit. In the traditional CWC, we have a moment once a week where we have something a little bit more discussion based. Annie, can you talk a little bit about what students can expect from these webisodes, why we have these webisodes?
Sure, I'd love to. So just like you were saying, Sam, it is a small group discussion model that we are showing the students, you and I. It's kind of fun because you get to hear 2 professors talk about the readings and events and the individuals, and you get to hear us explain some of these concepts, even on a more personal level too, like how they impact our lives or how they've changed our thoughts on a certain matter, whether that matter is currently happening or one of the past. And then it's also a way for us to dive into the readings and some of the terms too. it's definitely more of a deep dive. There's not going to be any new content in these webisodes. We're just going a little bit deeper into that content. So perhaps we'll pick an individual, or we'll have a debate over two events or two ideas, and you and I will have to explain the significance of these. So it's a really good way for students to highlight some of those significances of mastery terms in the class, because those will come up very often in these webisodes. It's also a visual and interactive format as well. You'll see that there's ways for you to interact with us on these webisodes. So that's why we do these webisodes. Sam, what should students think about as they start this online course?
Yeah, if I'm thinking about advice that I would give to a student, the first thing I've already hinted at, which is make sure you give yourself enough time. This course is very doable. We've taught it for, I think this is our 11th summer teaching it. Now, I will say the one thing that students tend to trip up on or struggle with is if they don't give themselves enough time and they start to get behind. You're going to have homework due every day at 10 a.m. There's going to be just about every day, there's going to be something due. So the key is making sure you're giving yourself enough time to adequately do that homework. Now, the second thing I would say, second piece of advice is when you're watching these documentary films or when you're going through these museums, go through them with your mind open. When you're doing readings for the course, don't just move your eyes across the page and say, okay, I read that, but ask yourself, why are they assigning this reading? Why do they have these objects in the museum? Why are they telling this story? What ideas do they have there? And as you do that, ask questions. I mean, one of the things you can see on the corner of the screen here is my email address. As you're working through things, if you have questions, if you don't understand something, please email me. I will do my best to be responsive to student emails. As I said before, I'm going to be in Europe for the first 4 or 5 days of the class, so I might be a little slower to get back then, but it'll still be within the day. But once I get back, I'll be a lot more responsive to that as well. So have your mind open, ask questions. The other piece of advice I would say is, along with the assignment you have each day, we also have a study guide for the course. When you're looking on Moodle, you can see the course study guide, and it talks about what exams will look like. It also has a list of vocabulary, so terms you need to know for the course, and it has kind of themes for potential exam essay questions. So I would say if you're going through this course and you're saying my only goal is each day is to get the assignment done and I'm not going to do anything else but get the assignment done, you will do fine. And then you might get to the test and realize, well, I'm not fully ready for this exam, because the exam is going to be built around the stuff you're doing for the daily homework, but also around these vocabulary terms and these essay themes. So when you look at those vocabulary terms, you'll notice two types of terms. There are terms that are mastery terms and terms that are recognition terms. For all of those terms, there's kind of 3 things you need to know. And then for the mastery term, there's 1 extra thing. So for all terms, you should be able to identify who or what that term is. So kind of a basic definition, who this person was, what ideas do we attach to them. Second thing you need to know is where they're from. Third thing you need to know is when they were alive. So you don't need to know exact dates, but the rough century people were alive. So when I say you need to know these things, if I were taking this course, as I was going through each day, when I encountered one of these terms, I would write out this information. I would write the term, who or what it is, when it is, where it is. Because your exams are going to be open note and open book, so the more you can organize your information, the easier these exams are going to be for you to do. Now, for those terms that are listed as mastery terms, and there's fewer of those, these are the ones we want you to dig a little bit deeper on. We also want you to think about why that term is significant, why that term is important. Annie, how do you think about significance when you're working on, vocabulary terms in a course like this?
Sure, yeah. So, well, first of all, like you were saying, I think it is important to write down each of these mastery terms as you go, each of the terms, but especially the mastery terms as you learn about them. When you do, I would choose a random mastery term and kind of quiz yourself on whether you can talk about it without preparation. And then that kind of tells you like, oh, I feel comfortable with this term. But before you even write those note cards, you have to know what we mean by significance. So I would say a quality like note card on a mastery term should have 2 or 3 points of different significance for that individual. So different in that you don't want to just build off of your previous point. You want them to be distinct from one another. For example, let's use MLK Jr. A lot of students come into this class with much background knowledge on MLK Jr. He's one of the most recent, if not the most recent terms or people that we study in this course. He's one of great cultural importance in American history. So most students know a little bit about him coming into class. Now, if your first point of significance is he wrote letter from a Birmingham jail, and then your second point of significance is when he was in jail, he wrote about racial injustice. You can see how both of those points are really just one point together. And they're also a little bit too vague, right? We can say he wrote something, but that's a little bit more of like who he is and less of why he's important. So instead, you want to ask questions like, why is he significant to Western philosophy? Or why is he significant to Western Christianity? Maybe why is he significant in his context, but also to the context of this course, to those big questions we're asking of who am I? How do I relate to others? Big themes like justice and equality, and maybe even connect him to other individuals in the course, because those same questions that MLK is wrestled with throughout all of Christian history. So it's not so much about why is he important, but why is he significant to CWC? So if you come into class with a lot of background knowledge of MLK Jr., that's fantastic and we love to see it. But make sure that your points of significance are ones that we've talked about in class or can be drawn from class material, because that way we know that you've wrestled with MLK within the context of the CWC course. Does that make sense, Sam?
Absolutely, yeah. And I would add a third question. So you mentioned, why were they important in their own time? What is their lasting importance? And then the third thing, because it's Christianity, Western culture, you can always look at like what impact do they have on Christianity? What connection do they have to Christianity? Now, for each term, you won't necessarily be able to answer all three of those questions, but that's a pretty good start for digging into how you might approach this. Well, Annie, we're running out of time in this first segment, but students, I want to point you to your very first assignments. These are due by 11:59 p.m. on Wednesday, June 21st. So you'll have assignments due tomorrow at 10 a.m. as well. But for June 21st by 11:59 p.m., two things you need to do. First is to take the syllabus quiz on Moodle. This is a 10-point quiz, which is just checking that you have read the syllabus, looked at the materials on Moodle, watched this webisode. And if you hear my voice right now, obviously you've watched this webisode. You can retake that quiz as many times as you need to get 10. So everybody should get 10 on that, but it's just making sure that you've gone through and actually read those materials and are familiar with what they say. The second assignment, which is due by 11:59 p.m. on Wednesday, the 21st, is to post your first Poodle response. So I will put I will start the thread, the sort of discussion post thread. And what I want you to do is to create a brief Poodle video, kind of introducing yourself to the class. So on that thread, create a video for yourself in Poodle and tell us about yourself. Tell us your name, your major, your hometown, and where you're going to be this summer. Especially if you're, some people are working jobs in interesting places or living in interesting places. So tell us where you're going to be taking the course from. Second thing, tell us what you're most excited about or most maybe anxious about for this summer course. And then the third thing is tell us something else that's interesting about you. And everybody's got something interesting about them, but something that's interesting about you that will help us sort of learn a little bit more about you. So create your video and post it to that discussion thread by 11:59 p.m. on Wednesday, the 21st. Annie, that's all the time we have for our first segment. We'll be back in just a few seconds to dig a little bit deeper into kind of the big theme verse for CWC. And we're back. Annie, you and I, in segment one, we talked a little bit about kind of our experience in this course, but both you and I have pretty unique CWC stories. So in this segment, we want to let students know a little bit about who we are and what our relationship to this course is, and then dig into what is the big theme verse for CWC. So maybe can you start by telling us your CWC story?
Yeah, so I was hired in 2011, which feels so long ago now, but I was hired then to TA for CWC. I was hired by Sam Mulberry on the other side of the world. And at the time I was a history and social studies ed double major at Bethel. So I TA'd for 4 terms, which was like the total number of terms I could do at the time. And then I did student teaching. Like I didn't want to do student teaching because I wanted to keep tutoring in CWC. I loved it so much. And it really prepared me to be a teacher. And then I taught for a bit in public schools. I got my master's in South Korea, kept in contact with Sam the whole time. We're good buddies. I moved back to Minnesota and there was an opening to teach CWC in 2018. And I was like so thrilled and floored that former professors asked me to teach CWC with them. And so it was a very humbling and exciting experience. So I taught CWC at Bethel from 2018 to I think like 2021, maybe. And then have been moving back, or I moved back to South Korea. I teach special ed here at an international school. And my life still includes CWC with webisodes like this. So I'm really excited to be here. Sam, your story is very similar to mine, but
older.
2.0.
Right.
Better,
no, you're the 2.0 because you're like the one after mine. So yeah, so I'm also a Bethel grad. I started at Bethel in the fall of 1995, and this is one of the courses I took in my first semester. Now, I didn't come to Bethel as a history major or an education major or anything like that. I was a computer science major, but I took this course and I really loved it. And like Annie, I applied to be a TA and was hired for that. And in the middle of my first semester as a TA, I just had this moment of feeling like this is the thing I enjoy doing the most. I should change my major to history. So I did. I changed my major to history. And my dream was to someday teach a course like CWC. So I TA'd for 5 semesters while I was a student at Bethel. I graduated. I taught 1 year of high school art in Mobile, Alabama. I went to graduate school for history, and I had started teaching CWC in the fall of 2001, which is probably before most people taking this course right now were born, and have been teaching it ever since. I teach it at this point. I teach it 4 semesters a year, so I teach it in summer, I teach it in fall, in January, and in spring. So I'm somewhere in the low 60s for number of times that I've been part of this class. But we tell you that story to say, most of you are going to take this class. You're going to have a great summer. You're going to learn a lot, and you're going to go on to live happy, productive lives doing whatever you're going to do. But we want to warn you that there are people who take this class and it sort of forever shapes their destiny, because that's what happened to me. It's what happened to you. So it can happen. So just sort of be warned about that. One of the things that I mentioned in the first segment is that this course has this long tradition at Bethel. So I took it in 1995. The course was about 10 years old when I took the class. And ever since the very beginning of the course, the professors who designed it picked as their theme verse Hebrews 11 through 12:1 or 12:2, depending on how you want to read it. So I want to talk a little bit about that and what that tells us about what we're going to be doing in this course. So if you're familiar with the book of Hebrews, chapter 11 is famously known as the faith chapter. So this is written in the 1st century AD, and it basically is a kind of telling of the story of the people of faith, basically from the Hebrew scriptures or the Old Testament. So it starts with Adam and talks about how Adam lived by faith, and then it talks about how Noah lived by faith and how Abraham lived by faith, and Isaac and Jacob, and it sort of keeps going through all of these people who live by faith. And then there's a point where the author is just like, I don't have time to list all of the people of faith from the Old Testament, but it sort of talks about like, these are the heroes of the faith that came before us. And then as you move from chapter 11 into the beginning of chapter 12, the author gives us this image, which I think is core to what we're going to be doing in this class. So Hebrews 12:1 and 2 says, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God." So this image of this great cloud of witnesses, right? The author in chapter 11 is telling us about all the people who came before us. And then he says, all these people who came before us, these people of faith who came before us, are in this great cloud of witnesses. So imagine up above us, this cloud filled with all of the people of faith who came before. And what the author says is that cloud of witnesses is looking down on you. They're looking down on you as you run the race of faith. They, before you, have run their race of faith. Now you're running your race of faith. So it's like this great historical relay race. And now you're the one holding the baton. And the idea is this cloud of witnesses there watching you and cheering you on. So it's like a stadium of these people of faith watching you run the race that they ran before. And how that applies to this course is that, I mean, the book of Hebrews is written in the 1st century AD, which is the very beginnings of Christianity. So what this course wants to do is take that idea of the cloud of witnesses, which, ends in the 1st century AD, and say, well, what if we continued to stretch that out? What if we continued to populate your cloud of witnesses? Because there are all of these people of faith who've come in the last 2,000 years. And for a lot of us, we don't know that story. Our sense of Christian history is often like, well, I know the Old Testament and the New Testament, and then I know the people with gray hair in my church. But there's this 2,000-year gap for a lot of us. And this course is about how do we fill that gap in? How do we learn about those people whose faith and whose life really impact us and our faith, maybe in ways that we don't know? So hopefully by the time we get to the end, you'll have all kinds of new names and new faces and new ideas from this expanded cloud of witnesses. Annie, when you think about the people we're going to study in this course, who are special people in your cloud of witnesses?
Yeah, I love that description of it, like a relay race. I also think of the cloud of witnesses kind of like a genealogy, like a religious family tree. But at the same time, kind of a chosen family. So like Sam, like you're my chosen family. Like we're not blood related, but like we are connected forever, like, and we're so close and we care for each other, right? I think what I love about the cloud of witnesses is like, there are some things about Christians of the past. There are some things that some believe that I reject, and there are others that I accept. And so part of it is a little bit chosen. Like who am I going to have in my cloud that is inspiring me and talking to me directly? So my two people that I chose are kind of like at the way start and the way end like of history in this course. So first we're going 200s AD, Roman North Africa, a woman named Perpetua. And I chose her because she's a young mother. She's only about 22 years old, and she's put to death for her faith. And you'll learn the context of Perpetua early on in this course. For me, I think she's the hardest one to empathize with, but one of the individuals I'm most inspired by, because she was willing to deny her family, deny her friends, deny her cultural values, and take persecution with gladness. And that's something that I've never experienced as somebody growing up in the West and now in the East, but 21st century American Christianity, 21st century Korean Christianity, it's pretty comfortable. And I've never really had to feel persecution to call myself a Christian or to be able to go to places of worship. And so it's hard for me to put myself in the shoes of someone like Perpetua, who could not openly express her faith, and in fact, when she did so, was put to death. I also think she's really important because she expands and challenges my perception of the West, because she's in North Africa, and of Christianity, because I think a lot of times when we look back on Christian history, we think of specific places, and maybe North Africa isn't the first one that comes to mind for American Christians, but that was a hub of theology, a hub of early Christianity. and certainly where a lot of our clouds of witnesses come from. So I think she's really important. And then on the way other end of history, MLK Jr. is wrestling with a lot of the same issues and ideas that we even see Perpetua talking about, though their context is certainly quite different. We have a 1960s civil rights activist displaying, in our reading, the importance of civil disobedience when faced with an unjust law. So both of these individuals have wrestled with unjust laws, and what are their sources of authority for pushing against those laws or accepting those laws? So their discussions on justice, law, and order, like all of those values are important, but they can conflict with one another. And they're all bedrocks of especially American or Western history and Western culture. And I kind of like them because they almost feel like bookends of the course. Certainly we're going to go even further back than 200s AD, but they kind of feel like on the other end, on opposite ends, but talking about the same ideas. Sam, who are your cloud witnesses in your cloud?
There we go.
That makes it sound like an Apple product or something.
Right. So I picked somebody who is also from Roman North Africa, but a few centuries after Perpetua, and that is somebody we'll talk about at the end of the first unit, and that is a man named Augustine of Hippo. So he's a North African bishop in the late 4th, early 5th century, and he is arguably the most important Christian theologian in the West. People think about if you're ranking the most important people in history of Christianity in terms of actually shaping the church, Jesus would be number one if you count him. Then it would be Paul because he wrote most of the New Testament. Then it's Augustine. I mean, he's this monumental theologian. He shapes the church going forward. His shadow sort of looms over Christian theology to this very day. When you take Christian theology, you will encounter Augustine again, because you can't do theology in the West without talking about Augustine. But that's not why I have him on my list. I have him on my list because along with all his sort of monumental theological works, he also writes this kind of spiritual memoir, autobiography called The Confessions. And it's this remarkable story about, his life growing up. And it's a story of his conversion. He's not he's not raised as a Christian, but he comes to Christianity sort of, maybe in his late 20s. But Confessions is the story of how he gets there. And it is a pretty remarkable story. And it's about all the kind of big questions he wrestles with, as he's trying to think about how you find meaning in life, and how he eventually, he has this great line of, our hearts are restless until they find their rest in you, God. And that's really what Confessions is about, is this restless heart seeking after God. And I'm so moved by that because even though I live, 1600 years after Augustine, did not grow up in the culture he grew up in, did not speak the languages he spoke, I don't even have a similar story to his. There are so many moments when I read Confessions where I feel this kind of resonance in my heart, where it's like, oh, I know exactly what he's talking about. I know exactly that feeling of uncertainty, or when you're wrestling with that particular question. For me, he sort of serves as what the historian Barbara Tuchman calls a distant mirror, this person from far away in terms of time and space that reflects something back directly to me. So my hope is you find somebody like that as you're going through this course. The second person I would say is from the 17th century, a mathematician and scientist and philosopher named Blaise Pascal. And he's living in the heart of the scientific revolution between Galileo and Newton. And he's interesting because he's a devout Christian, but he also understands science and math and philosophy and where the world is going. And he's concerned. He's concerned that we're going to tip too far towards looking to science and reason and reject the idea of faith. And he has this great line, the heart has its reasons, which reason does not know what to make of. Sort of this idea that like the heart and faith is a kind of knowledge, and just in the way the head and reason is a kind of knowledge, and we need to try to find this balance between those. And I think he's a really powerful voice for thinking about that and trying to understand religion both through the mind and through the heart. And so he's just a really important person to me, and we'll talk more about him when we get to the third unit of this course. So those are a little preview of some of the folks you're going to be meeting this semester. You're going to be meeting a lot more. And maybe when we get to the end of this course, you'll have an opportunity to write a little bit about who are the people who have most influence your cloud of witnesses that you're learning about in this course. Andy, that's all the time we have for this segment. We'll be back in just a few seconds to wrap up the show. All right, we're back. It's happy time. We always love to end these webisodes with some anniversaries, things happening today. Let's get this going. Happy birthday to Andy Dwyer of Pawnee, Indiana, and I guess Peter Quill / Star-Lord, aka Chris Pratt. The actor turns 44 today. Annie, you may or may not know this, but the Parks and Rec actor was born on this day in Virginia, Minnesota. Did you know he was Minnesotan?
I did not know that.
Who is your favorite Minnesota-born celebrity?
It's probably so obvious, but Prince. He's the king, you know? He's the prince. Yeah. I love him. I miss him. Rest in peace.
Sometimes the basic answer is the right answer, right?
Right. Happy anniversary to Greenland. The island nation assumed self-rule on this day in 2009, 14 years ago. Sam, although Greenland is a very large landmass, its total population is 56,653 people. Can you please put that number into perspective for us?
Yeah, I was trying to think about what a way to imagine that number. And so I went to Wikipedia and did a bunch of counting. I was curious how many stadiums in the world could seat the entire population of Greenland. And the answer is 214. There are 214 buildings that human beings have built that can seat the entire population of Greenland. So yeah, get your head around that. That's kind of crazy.
That is unreal.
And finally, happy trails to Hector Boiardi, the Italian-American chef, businessman, and founder of Chef Boyardee, died on this day in 1985 at the age of 87. Annie, what is your favorite meal that comes from a can?
Look, I'm a big fan of canned meals. I feel like I'd do great if there was an apocalypse. I would just eat canned meals all day. Now, my two favorites, SpaghettiOs, obvious. And the other one, some would argue isn't a meal, but to me it is by the amount that I eat it. Canned cranberries.
I did not expect that.
Do you like them? Like the Thanksgiving
absolutely
ones?
Not.
The ones where you pour them out and it's still the can shape?
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
Those are my favorite. I could eat it for a meal.
Fantastic. That's so much better than any answer I could have imagined. Students, hopefully you've enjoyed this. I can't wait to work with you this semester. Just some quick reminders. Remember to do your syllabus quiz and your Poodle response by 11:59 p.m. on Wednesday, June 21st. That's all that we have, but we will see you throughout the summer. Say goodnight, Stacy.